Nacho man, yeah. I got to be a Nacho man. To be a Nacho man. I got to be a Nacho man.
Welcome, Vault Dwellers. My name is Nacho Bidness, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. I don't normally go for lore videos or trailer analysis videos. There are other YouTubers that I think do it far better than I ever could. But when I looked for information on this particular location, I didn't find anything. And the longer I look at this place, the weirder it gets. We're at Anchor Farm today, and I think that this place merits some discussion. I'm especially hoping to hear some thoughts from people in the comments below. Anchor Farm is pretty much the first place that you're going to come to if you follow the road out of Vault 76. You can follow the trail that the robots point you down, and that'll take you down eventually past the lumber mill and Flatswoods. But if you follow the parking lot and the road and everything, you come to Anchor Farm. And I mentioned trailer analysis. This place was featured in the very first Fallout 76 trailer. It was the loading screen for the beta. And it is also shown prominently in the upcoming DLC Wastelanders, where we're going to get NPCs in Fallout 76. So that's the first thing that strikes me about this place, is that Bethesda seems to really like it a lot. And it's certainly a very colorful and interesting place to look at. Perhaps that's all it is, but perhaps there is more. There's a number of things here that I think could be chalked up to carelessness or laziness on the part of Bethesda, but when we look at some of the other stuff that's going on here, I'm not so sure. The first is the name of the place itself. It is called Anchor Farm, and sure enough, there is a giant anchor here. This thing probably weighs in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 3,000 pounds, and as I look at it, I wonder what in the world would prompt someone to bring this thing up here. Perhaps it was just a interesting or attempt to add some kitsch or some interest to the farm, but it was a big job getting it here. And I say that because if you look at the closest major body of water, it's this river over here. That's a long ways. And I, in fact, did run down this road to see if there was a marina or boat dock or anything that would indicate some kind of river traffic down there. And there was nothing. There was just some rad barrels at the end of that road. And that's it. Interesting, but not all that telling. There's another thing here that I'm not sure if this was carelessness or deliberate by Bethesda, because this place has not one and not two tractors of the same design, but it in fact has 4 tractors that are all exactly the same. You may or may not have noticed, but there are 2 tractor designs in Fallout 76. Although, since they are both red and both tractors, it is easy to walk past them and not even notice that they are in fact different. But this has 4 of the same tractor. What's more, it only has a single plow. What in the world is going on here that there would be 4 tractors? Again, this is something that could be chalked up to laziness. Perhaps it was simply an oversight or overuse of a particular asset by Bethesda. We do know that this place was an active farm and must have been fairly successful because we can still see rotting hay bales all around the place. I don't know myself, I'm not a farmer, whether or not hay bales would take 25 years to rot, but they're scattered all around. The next thing that strikes me as strange about this place is this water tower. Typically, water towers are placed on high ground. That is, in fact, their purpose, after all, to be the highest thing around so that water goes up to the top, and then after it's pumped up there, it just pressurizes all the pipes in your water district by gravity. Yet when we look around this location, the ground is more or less flat down to the river, and everywhere else around here is higher than this. They've placed this water tower at the very bottom of a valley, and that is strange. I suppose we could also chalk the windmill up to something being strange, but I account for that as simply this was used up until modern water systems came in, and after that it was obsolete but just left in place to rot. Next thing that I think is strange about this place, and makes me wonder whether or not it was by design, is this biplane. If you look at it, you see the way that there's all these stripes along the length of the fuselage, and it's a little bit harder to see in this light, but it's also on this wing. What that suggests is that this is primarily a wooden biplane that is covered in cloth. That's a very common design for biplanes after all. Some of them did have metal areas, for example, around the wing right here, or the engine cowling for reinforcement, or sometimes the edges of the aerodynamic surfaces like the elevators, rudder, and ailerons, but they were mostly cloth covered. It also has an open cockpit, which actually, by the way, if you've never actually looked inside here, there's a lot of detail in this cockpit. You can see the stick and the throttle on the side and a whole bunch of gauges and stuff. Kind of neat. But a biplane like this pretty much has to have a hangar to live in. Planes like this only fly in good weather. And if this is some kind of crop duster or something, you would expect that there would be a barn somewhere around here for this to be in. But there's not. What's more, this guy is fortunate enough to have a whole extra wing, an entire extra engine for the thing, and an extra propeller that he has more or less stored outside. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Finally, there's this light that is just apparently growing out of a tree. I don't know. It's just stuck to the side of this tree. There's no apparent power source to it. It certainly provides very nice ambiance to this place after dark, but it looks really out of place up there on a tree with no power supply. So those are the things that we look at that we could discount as just being careless by Bethesda, and yet there's a number of things around here that say otherwise. And the first is the runway for this airplane. Although it's not immediately apparent, there is a runway for it. That was actually going to be one of the things that I was going to point out is wrong about this place, but what I discovered was that around the bend up here, if you come over here, there's a fallen tree stump, but otherwise, this is a smooth, level bit of ground. It's kind of overgrown, but you would expect a dirt runway to get overgrown in 25 years. And I am betting that those trees here at the end are a lot taller than they were 25 years ago. It speaks to there being a lot of thought and planning around this particular location. Speaking of thought and planning, I think I forgot to mention that because this is featured in the Wastelanders DLC, we do have a unique opportunity to look at something in a game that we already own that is in a trailer coming up for the game that we own. It's strange, but interesting. There are a number of shots in the Wastelanders DLC that are longer and closer that show lights and other things that are changed about this place. Indeed, if you look closely at the screen where the NPC is standing here in front of the door, you can see that the door has been replaced from a plank of plywood to a door that actually opens. I've not actually noticed this note before. What does it say? The military showed us last night. They're evacuating us in the morning. They won't tell us why. If you find us, they're taking us to Flatwoods. Find us when you get there. Fascinating. It only lends itself to something else that I've noticed about this place, and actually the next thing that I was planning on talking about, so lucky find right there in the middle of making this video. Because there are lots of other things around this place that show deliberate intent and some storytelling that's going on with the placement of the objects around here, and that includes this armored personnel carrier. My guess was that this showed up just before the bombs dropped, and indeed that note would seem to confirm that this showed up just before the bombs dropped. And apparently they must have showed up on the night of October 22nd, 2077, as indicated in the note, and then the bombs dropped on the morning of the 23rd. And after that, this thing would have probably been immobilized. Most vehicles are immobilized by the electromagnetic pulse of nuclear bombs, and so they were not actually able to continue their journey to Flatwoods after the bombs dropped. What's interesting here is the number of bodies that we find that are, in fact, soldiers. The note, again, confirms that this happened just before the war. Also, everything around here is a skeleton. So we know that they were fighting something, right? They fortified this place with sandbags as best they could in the front yard, along the front porch, and even on the roof there. But what in the world were they fighting? It's not like the Chinese invaded mainland America. My best guess is that the Chinese invader robots, the little ones that are right outside of Vault 76, were more numerous and more deadly directly after the bombs dropped. Because we can not only see soldier corpses, but we can also see a number of civilians here. My guess is that they had planned to take everyone to Flatwoods, were stuck here when the bombs dropped, and the soldiers did their duty and made a last stand with the people that lived here. They weren't trying to force them out or anything, because if they had been, we would expect to find the bodies on the other side of the barricades. There's a lot of detail that goes into all of these object placements, and it makes me question whether or not I'm being too dismissive with other things that I've been pointing out around this location. There's another thing that's strange about this location. There are a lot of rad barrels around, We know this was a farm. We know it was a fairly successful farm. After all, the farmer was rich enough to own 4 tractors and a crop duster, and some very expensive parts for that crop duster, and a nice big farm truck. So why did he have rad barrels on his land? Not only that, but there are a number of rad barrels in the pond over here. We know that these rad barrels must have been placed here pre-war. After all, if any of the responders or other post-war survivors had come through here, they likely would have moved these things away from an open water source. Most of the time, when something like this is in these games, there's a reason for it, and there's usually something that's explained. A great example of that would be if you go to the Red Rocket just south of Sanctuary in Fallout 4, you can find in a terminal there a story that people were doing some illegal radiation barrel dumping for profit. You can get the same thing if you go over here to the safe and clean disposal. There was a lot of illegal dumping that was going on here, and it's borne out in notes and holotapes that we find there. But we have no clues at this location why that might be taking place. Why would a farmer be willing to poison his successful farm by allowing rad barrels to be placed on his land and in his pond? The last thing that I found here that really has me wondering what we're going to find out in the Wastelanders DLC is back here next to the runway that I found. Where did it go? If I can find it again here. Here it is. Isn't this strange? It's a hole in the ground that's been covered up, and I was able to, with my Pip-Boy light and some kajiggering of the camera and such, I was able to count 4 skulls and 2 rib cages down there. This is a mass grave. Why is there a mass grave out back of this farm? It seems fairly obvious that the residents and the soldiers died together and died shortly after the war, and so that means that that mass grave is likely pre-war. Was the farmer a serial killer, and this was hiding his terrible deeds? Was this maybe a last-ditch effort to try and bury the dead after the war happened? You know, that one doesn't make a lot of sense, since everybody on the farm likely died on October 23rd or October 24th, 2077. So, what's with the mass grave out back? Clearly, this video raises a lot more questions than it does answers, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments. Ultimately, I think that this place is a fascinating case study in a location in a Fallout game, in that if you are willing to take the time and look at a place in detail, there is often far more that you can find than what is just on the surface. And that's one of the things that I really love about these games, and it's one of the things that I think Bethesda are pretty much the ultimate masters at telling a story just by putting objects in certain places. If you like this video, hit the like button down below. Again, really want to hear your comments on it. If you didn't like, please tell me why so that I can try and do better for you next time. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. And until next time, my name is Nacho Bidness, and I'm saying it's a great big wasteland out there, Let's go have fun in it.